Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the next episode of the Emergence Show. This month, we are focused on the topic of gaming and what it means for brands, retailers, and especially this next era of computing, which is spatial computing. And as we know, a lot of tips and tricks and skill set that we got from the gaming industry over the years can apply to this spatial computing era. And I want to tell you quickly about who I am, what I do. I'm Nico Farah. I am a creative technology, and I work in the intersection of spatial computing and AI to help brands, be prepared for this space and for the younger generation as we step into it. And I founded a fashion DAO. That's how I got to know our special guest today, Josh. Who has been a great talent, adding value, supporting the community, and teaching us the concept of generative AI and what it means for the fashion industry and for the creators. And so today, he's joining me to talk about now what is this generative AI looking like for the gaming industry and then the spatial computing era. I will let Josh introduce himself. Also, I want to let you guys know that you can interact with us through the comments section. So if you have any question as we speak, feel free to share with us. And if you have any thoughts and insights that you want to add, feel free again putting it in the comments section. All right, how are you doing, Josh?
Hey, good. Yeah, my name's Joshua Larson, and I've been a game developer for 20 years now. Have started up several game studios over the years. Have a studio named Numinous Games, and we're best known for That Dragon Cancer, which was released in 2016, kind of storytelling experience. And then later that year, actually, we started working on projects that incorporate AI as a core feature of the game. And then since then, I've just kind of gotten more and more into AI over the years. About 2 years ago, got really into image generation using generative AI, and have been incorporating it more and more into my work as a fashion designer and as a game developer. And yeah, so I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me, and look forward to digging in.
Awesome, sounds good. Thank you so much. So, tell us how you heard about this AI boom and kind of like what interested you, and what does it mean in general for the industry, as you are both on the creative side and also the development side of this.
Yeah, good question. I would say in games, AI has kind of always been a part of the game experience as a player. Um, how it started was uh, when you make a game, you're kind of trying to build an entire world from scratch, and
Mhm.
so you usually want to have some kind of virtual character, and you want to give them some kind of intelligence. And so with games, like, it started at a much more primitive level, like, how do we move the character in an intelligent way? How can we program the character to make decisions, right? And so AI has kind of always been a part of like what game developers think about when they're building their virtual worlds. What's really changed, is the incorporation of machine learning and deep learning to make AI a lot more powerful than it was before. And so yeah, I think that's been a big shift for my work as a game developer. Around like later that year in 2016, after we released That Dragon Cancer, we started working on this project called Untethered. And in that game, conversational AI is a core feature of the game. And so what we did was we created this kind of a system where we use speech recognition. In our case, it was Google Cloud Speech, because that was the best performing solution at the time, and it has very good support for noise cancellation, or like being able to read your voice in the midst of a noisy environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like a part of the AI. And then, of course, just the pure like translating your speech into text. The way that our human brain works with natural language processing is we hear a certain sound that's like a phrase of words, and then shortly after, our brain actually figures out what those specific words are based on kind of the context of the phrase of what we're saying. And
Mm-hmm.
they programmed the AI to work the same way, where it is able to guess what the last several words that you just said were, and then based on the guess of all of those words, it can increase the accuracy on like one of them that it's not quite sure about. And so it's really interesting because in terms of neuroscience, that's how the human brain works as well. And so we leverage that in our game. And it was we kind of started with this goal that we wanted the experience of playing the game to be really immersive,
Right.
and that we wanted the characters to feel more alive. In a lot of games where you have an interactive narrative, you're just choosing options from a menu. You know, you've got three options,
Right.
and you're able to like read what they are, and you're just choosing like one of those. It's very predetermined, and it feels like you're playing a game, you know. And so in VR, which this game was a VR game, uh, it was important that the experience felt like a normal conversation. And in a
Mm-hmm.
normal conversation, you're not just choosing something from a menu. You know, you can say anything, and
Right.
and then along with that, there are points where, like, in the normal course of conversation, you might interrupt each other just slightly, like what you're saying might overlap with the other person. And being able to program that into a game experience is pretty difficult. And so with Google Cloud Speech, we were able to stream the results from the speech recognition live while you're playing the game, and be able to interpret what you as the player were saying, and it just makes the experience feel more like an everyday conversation. Um, so yeah, that was kind of how I started getting into AI in games, and like using it to improve the player experience. And then we also used what was called Wit AI, which tries to interpret the intent of what you're saying. So we can recognize the exact words that you're speaking, but then what do those words actually mean? You know, is it something that's positive? Is it something that's negative?
Right.
Um, you know, like when you have when you're talking about colors, like you could say purple, violet, and blue, and the question is like, okay, you've got those exact words, but maybe the intent of what you're saying is that you're talking about cool colors, you know. So that
Mm-hmm.
concept of like the fact that those three words are related conceptually, that's something that AI can really improve. And so we then use that to infer the intent of what the player is saying, and then that allows us to connect it with kind of the like multiple options, you know, that you would get in a game. So instead of making the player choose from a preset list of options, we just kind of try to infer what we think the player is trying to choose,
Mm-hmm.
but allow them to say anything. So it feels more like an everyday conversation, um, but you're still like you're kind of trying to influence the direction that the game is going, just like you would in a more traditional game experience. So so then from there, we kind of tied that in with our own custom character AI. So based on like the things that you were interacting with in the environment and the events that were unfolding, you know, the characters would respond in a different way. So that was kind of more of the old school AI, you know, where we're trying to create logic around how the virtual character is responding to what you're doing as a player. So we kind of had like, more advanced AI and kind of more traditional game AI that we then linked together to make the experience more immersive and make the characters feel more alive. So
So that's the adaptiveness, right?
yeah.
Kind of the game adapts to. So then, what part of it is new for you guys? Is it more like on the generative AI where you can now create assets and stuff? Can you elaborate more on what happened over the next over the last year or two?
Yeah. So yeah, from there, I started using image generation, especially in order to be able to really quickly concept and brainstorm ideas for games. So it started for me. It started with Midjourney. I was
Yeah.
using the private beta, and just started tinkering with it. And then a couple weeks into that, I had a transformative experience with it, where I realized that it was going to change like every creative industry because it kind of redefines the design process. And so I started using it to concept game environments. And then from there, just kind of like wanted to experiment, I guess, with concepting characters. And I didn't really, like, I didn't have this plan to get into fashion design. But when I was
Mhm.
concepting the characters, I realized that I really loved designing their clothing and like trying to figure out what clothing they should be wearing. And my first job working for somebody else was at a mom and pop clothing store. And I always wanted to do more with that. At the time, I was just a teenager, like doing mostly cleaning screens for screen printing. And then I eventually, like, I was trusted enough to be able to actually screen print the shirts. And that was really exciting. And so I ended up, doing screen printing on apparel. And that was fun. And I did some of that when I was in college, just with my own shirts and stuff like that. But I never really took it beyond that, beyond just like screen printing on apparel. And I always wanted to do more. And so when I was working with Midjourney, I realized like, hey, here's my chance to really dig in deeper and design more custom clothing. And so yeah, I just kind of kept doing it more and more, started sharing it online. And then that's when I got connected with the Fashion DAO and you and the kind of digital fashion community. And it was a really like welcoming and loving community. And so yeah, I just kept going and continued to design more and more, and ended up creating like tens of thousands of clothing designs. And it sort of centered around like a kind of specific aesthetic that I was developing. And so yeah, that was really exciting to kind of learn more about fashion design and spend more time working on custom clothing. And then from there, I ended up working on Avakin Life, which is a social game, and designing menswear for like the regular content updates that they provide within the game. So a lot of them are themed around either like a fall collection or a winter collection, or a specific holiday or special event or something like that. And so yeah, that was really like really fun and interesting to be able to learn like what the process is like for releasing regular content, in a game, and be able to try to produce collections very quickly. That was a challenge for sure. And for that, I use Stable Diffusion, and being able to use AI in several different ways, actually, which is like the first one was just kind of like how I was using Midjourney, where I could uh,
Prompt.
use it to create an entirely new design. And then there's a production company that then like takes that design, and I guess I first create the design, and then I create essentially a tech pack. So in the fashion industry, the tech pack is kind of like your technical specification of like
Mhm.
what the clothing, the details of what material you're going to use, or if there are specific features in the clothing, like a certain style of pocket or a certain zipper treatment or something like that. And so when you're designing your clothing, you need to somebody, sometimes it's the fashion designer as well, sometimes it's a fashion developer, just like kind of a different role. Somebody determines what are all those specifics. And so in the case of Avakin, when you're designing completely new clothing, you have your image, that's like your design, which is AI generated, and then you have to create a specification for it. So I would do both of those things, hand it over to this production company, and then they would create a 3D model of a new avatar, essentially. And so yeah, that was interesting. I did that. I also used AI to just create like patterns, and then apply that to an existing model to kind of like create a new design. So there could be a jacket, for example, and
Mhm.
the jacket, there's already that model for the jacket, but then you can create a new pattern for it. And then the last way was to use AI to completely reimagine what that model was. So in the case of the jacket, instead of just like creating a new repeating pattern that's applied to it, you could like turn a denim jacket into a leather jacket, for example. So it's a completely different material. It might have a different kind of aesthetic. Maybe one of them is like a luxury, higher end, more finely tailored jacket, and the other one is really grungy, and it has ripped sections to it or something. Or maybe in the case of leather, it would be like some kind of rough patina or something. And so you could use AI to kind of rethink what the jacket would look like, and then that's been integrated into Avacraft, which is the new. It's kind of like the user generated content version of what we were doing on the design team. And so yeah, and then the last kind of part of it was training custom AI models, and like trying to create like a specific aesthetic by using images as a data set, and then you train the AI model on that in order to fit kind of the goals of the creative director. So
Awesome.
so yeah, that was interesting. And then now I've been using AI for concepting for lighting in a game.
Mm.
So that was another. That's kind of the thing that I've just been doing more recently in the last several weeks. So um,
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
mhm.
Lots of details that we can go deeper into, but we
Yeah,
have a couple of questions. Hi, Chris. How are you? So, Chris is asking how long before an AI can actually purchase tokenized digital fashion for ourselves and digital twin? Well,
Hmm.
that's a little bit technical on the tokenized and the AI can purchase. I mean, Josh, have you got involved in tokenized parts or any of the projects that you were working on that was related to kind of like the Web3 side of the fashion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have so I guess maybe one example is through the Fashion DAO. I participated in the contest for last year's NFT NYC. Actually, I can share my screen here. I've got some of those images pulled up. Um, yeah, let me just share my screen. And so,
And you
yeah,
became a finalist, and we loved your work.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, so here are some of the designs that I created and submitted for the Fashion Dao contest, and
So
this
tell
is
us what's the story behind it? How did you come up
yeah.
with
So this is part of the kind of aesthetic that I was talking about.
it?
Over the course of maybe it was 8 months or 9 months or so, I was building out this world of characters that was the idea was to kind of pull inspiration from design language from all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because you have like all of these unique cultures that kind of have their own voice. But when you look at everything as a whole, um, it really like um, it's both like distinctive and unique with each culture, but in
Right.
the same sense, it's all kind of the same human language, you know? And
Right.
so I just find that really interesting how, in some ways, everything is related, even though it has its own distinct character. And I really
Right.
love that the kind of what's on the surface at first seems like a contradiction of like everybody's different and everybody's the same at the same time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's like it's kind of part of humanity to want to express yourself,
Sure.
and like everybody expressing themselves is still kind of like done in the same language. So that's kind of what I was trying to explore with my work, and so yeah, these pieces were for the Fashion Dao contest here,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then
So what was the process? You used Midjourney and you had
yeah.
some prompts, text prompts. Did you use image prompts?
Yeah, so it was a combination. So I used Midjourney, and it was a combination of text prompting and image prompting. Um, yeah, I would say it was a very involved and kind of evolutionary process. So with this work, I was kind of having a single prompt that I was refining over like hundreds of iterations. So I would
Wow.
create like I want to say it was maybe 8,000 images or something like that that kind of used the same Midjourney model and kind of like the same core prompt, and then I would create variations of it. And I was sort of like searching for something, I guess you could say, as a designer. I was like searching for something, and then I felt like I'd finally found it. And then I would create a whole bunch of images based on like that kind of aesthetic that I was going for. And then I would make small changes and tweaks to it. And then I would discover something new. And then I would create a whole bunch of images from that. And so
Nice.
it was like hundreds of hours of work of just like continually, thoroughly exploring this kind of design space, creating thousands of images. And then
Wow.
I started taking the generated images from the text prompt and then feeding those back in along with the text. And then
Wow.
sometimes I would only use the images, and I would take like 3 to 5 images usually, or 2 to 5, and then try to generate a bunch of images from those. And so over time, I was using like kind of those three different approaches: just text, and images, and then just images. And I created a kind of like evolution where there were some designs I was noticing when I would use image prompts. Some designs, certain elements were really strongly represented in kind of the children that I would create. And so, like in this image that I'm showing right now,
Right.
the headpiece was an example of like something that would the specific design of having these kind of like pointy ear sort of things. In this case, it looks almost like an owl or something. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so there were certain design features that would like come through in prompts, and then I would try to explore how that could carry through in a different way. So yeah, like here is another kind of reinterpretation of the pointy ear, but it's reinterpreted. And so and this was another example of one thing that I kind of blurred, I guess, was the line between fashion and beauty. So the actual like face would have different features, and in some sense, almost had a sculptural element to it. Trying to see if
Yeah, I mean, fashion and beauty overlap a lot,
yeah.
and they're both for the same purpose of expressing your identity.
Hmm. Yeah.
Very cool. I
I
also want to
started.
touch on something very unique to you. You know, I have been exposed to a lot of great creators, but I think you're one of the most diligent, ethical, you know, using this type of technology because I don't think you ever use like the name of an artist that has a certain style. You actually create things very original, and I think that's very, I mean, it takes a lot more work, as you said, but the outcome is much more ethical and much more unique and original. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you made this decision, what it takes to do something like this?
Yeah, that's thank you. That's a good a good question. I think for me, like there are definitely times where I use specific artist names as a kind of like study, just like any artist would. You're trying to study artists from the past, and
Right.
so you kind of use them as a reference. But for me, like where I start is if I'm going to use an artist name, first I'll try to use one that's no longer alive. And that's especially important because even if like the lawyers of the AI end up like successfully defending that they're not breaking any laws or whatever, there's still the ethical considerations of kind of like what is the social contract of society, right? And so you have all these artists that have expressed like being really frustrated and feeling like it's unfair, and it's kind of like a violation of the social contract that these AI companies have just scraped all these images,
Right.
including my own. Like I've looked at the data set in the Lion database, my own images are in there. So for me, it's personal. And and I'm affected, just like other digital artists. And so yeah, what I try to do is avoid living artists, and then also if I'm going to reference anybody, I try to blend multiple ones together to create something new. Which again, like so many artists, you're inspired, you have multiple inspirations, and so what comes out of that is some interpretation where different elements that you're inspired by are influencing in a different way. And so I might start with that, but then I'll quickly end up moving away from it and like finding my own kind of unique space. And then
Right.
uh, basically, as soon as possible, try and use my own creations as the input instead of like referencing somebody else. And so yeah, with this work, like in the beginning, I was referencing some artists to kind of understand the style, and then over time, I would like use more and more vague wording, and then eventually kind of try to like almost like refine artist references out of my prompting, and then come up with something that's like doesn't really use any existing artists as a reference at all. And my goal is like, I guess part of what I'm interested in is imagining something new. And
Yes.
so that motivation is like probably the number one way that I try to like avoid clearly referencing existing artists. And so it's not, for me, it's not even just about the prompting, it's also the style itself. Like, you could argue that you can't copyright a style, but as a creative person, I don't want to copy somebody's style, even if it's legal. you know,
Yeah.
I want to create something that's my own voice. And so yeah, that carries through to the actual prompting as well. Like I don't want to prompt specific artists, or something that's like really recognizable. When I was kind of like tinkering, I had some images that use like Studio Ghibli. Like that's a really popular one, especially early in Midjourney. And that was cool to see how it interpreted Ghibli, which almost every time was inaccurately. And that's actually intentional on their part. Is they would use some of the images as reference, and it would be kind of like it, but not exactly, because they when they train the model, they bias it against like directly copying, kind of for the same reason of what I was saying. But sometimes, like if you continue like pounding on it, sometimes you can get images that are really close, just because you're kind of like trying to work against their bias of trying to avoid copying. You can work against it and actually copy stuff if you try hard enough. But yeah, I definitely want to like have my own voice that's distinct, and so yeah,
Yes.
for me it does take more work, but I was just so interested in image generation with generative AI that I very quickly became I like was exposed to so much imagery within the community, because people are experimenting and trying new ideas all the time. And then once you're that immersed, it's easy to kind of develop this attitude of like, oh, I've already seen that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's kind of old hat. And so I was
yeah.
just so immersed and so into it that I would like get, I guess, tired or exhausted by like seeing certain styles, and then I would
Mhm.
want to like find something different than that.
Yeah,
So
that's a really good point. I love that because the originality is one of the important factors of creativity. And
mm,
as you said, when AI and generative AI became popular, we suddenly saw a lot of pictures looking the same. So
yeah,
that's not really cool and exciting anymore. And so that's when you crave something new and unique, and it does take work. So that's great that you shared that with us. We have a couple more questions.
yeah,
And I before we jump into that, to finish this question on what Chris brought in, I think Web3 eventually can, if we can set up the infrastructure right, can solve with problems like this. How do we give credit to even designers and creators that are alive, and we can give them back the credit when we
yeah,
commercialize something. But right now, it's just too hard, too big of a problem to solve, because when they train on these, images or content, it just is really hard to like go down and see how much of what image and what artist's work was used, and then how you trace back and you create a wallet or something and give them money back. So it's a very foundational challenge that I think there are many people actually working on it. And so it is important to kind of think about, yes, there is hopefully a future for making things more democratized and more equitable. But at the moment, it's more in our hands how to use these tools to be more ethical. But yeah, I appreciate that. So, next question we have from Philip. Do you think AI video image generation like Sora will ever replace game engines? If so, might you think there might be a holdout of people who prefer game engines because they're more
yeah.
precise?
Uh, yes, I do. I don't think something like a game engine version of Sora will like take over everything, but I
Mhm.
do think that we will have game engines where AI generation, like generative AI, will be a major component of it. I do think that is going to happen. It's already getting close to real time with some of the new stable diffusion models, like Turbo, Stable Diffusion Turbo, and LCM are kind of specific examples of ways to find like clever shortcuts with how Stable Diffusion works, or a diffusion model, I should say. Find clever shortcuts, and then it becomes close to real time generation, which is really cool. And so I've seen there are demos of people who've taken their webcam, and they're able to have like a live video feed, and it runs at 15 frames a second or something like that, and being able to kind of like reimagine the world as they're looking around with their webcam, which is pretty cool. So you could imagine like walking around a game environment the same way. Of course, like there's plenty of improvements that need to be done with what's called there's a concept of coherence, which is like kind of how accurate the image is. So in the case of a person, we have 5 fingers, we have 2 hands, but sometimes the AI can just imagine that there's a third arm or something. And so coherence is kind of like how accurate the image is based on what we're trying to conceive. And so in the case of like generative AI for game engines, you would want what's called temporal coherence, which is like how accurate is it over time. So if you're like moving the camera across a forest environment, for example, you would want that same tree to look the same over the course of several images. Like you don't want it to just have the leaves change from green to orange, for example, all of a sudden, because you want the tree to look like it's the same tree, as you're moving around. And so there are definitely things like that that need to improve. And then, when it comes to like people's preferences, I think we're always going to have people who are creating games in a more traditional kind of handcrafted way, I guess you could say. I like to think of it as like the artisan philosophy. You have people who there are Amana colonies here where I live in Iowa, and they use like traditional hand tools to create really finely crafted furniture. And there's plenty of people who still buy it because it's just beautiful. It's inherently beautiful to have a finely crafted piece of furniture, and it's also really durable. And so I think it's going to be the same with game engines, that there will be like game creators who are artisans who finally craft a game using all human labor, and because of that they have their own voice themselves. So I think that's not going to go away right now. I think that version of it is people who build their own engines instead of using like a middleware like Unreal or Unity or Godot or whatever. And so that's really interesting as well, because when 1 or 2 people are building their own engine, it has its own character to it. And then every game that you create using that engine will then kind of like inherit some of that character. So it's just another way to like have something that's interesting and unique if you build your own technology. So I think that, that's definitely going to continue into the future, and it will still be valuable to people. It might not be the dominant thing, maybe having more AI will kind of become the dominant solution in different ways. But I still think there's going to be plenty of people who kind of like are intentionally using all human labor to create a game experience.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was at a conference, and the CMO of LVMH brought this concept of digital craftsmanship, because even when you're using AI or other tools to create 3D assets pretty quickly, you're not going to have all the details and the craftsmanship that you have, similar to the physical craftsmanship. Like your work, your hard work, your time, like even what we talked about, the images that you created, we can tell that you have spent so much time and effort to perfect it. And it's not just a single prompt. And so, I think that more people get used to AI and see the differentiation of hard work, craftsmanship versus something pretty quick, the more they're going to appreciate people who use this beautifully. So that's a good point. And I think another thing about Sora is like I heard from the head of generative AI at NVIDIA
Mm.
that they have been training the Sora. I mean, this is just a hypothesis that it has been trained on Unreal Engine type of levels and environments because it seems so coherent in so many ways, and the physics needs to get better, but it is almost there. And so yes, it is a very fascinating area, but as Josh mentioned, it's not going to take over the world all the way. Another question from Philip: there was a recent paper that came out looking at how synthetic data actually leads to convergence in AI models. So a diverse set of prompts might yield more similar images. Assuming their premise is true, how might this impact prompting and the resulting creativity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, the idea, I think, the way I think of it in with my experience in the game industry is, how do you create a healthy culture? So part of the danger of the games industry that I have seen in the past is, you have a possibility that you can develop an insular culture, which means like everybody's just referencing themselves in your community. And
Mm,
so it's important to have like diverse inspirations in order to come up with like unique new ideas. But the danger is you can have people who um, grew up playing popular games and then they just want to like create games that are inspired by those popular games. And then when you have a culture that's like really set apart from the world and develops like really strong ideas that everybody understands, it's kind of like your own unique language. um, you have a danger that everybody is just in their echo chamber, influencing each other, and nobody takes ideas from the outside. So definitely the same thing applies to AI. I think that there's definitely a need to both, like, when you're creating output from the AI, to like
mm,
work toward trying to develop something more original, but then also training AI. If you're like over time you're adding in more and more images that themselves are AI generated, then that can bias your training to kind of like maybe reinforce common ideas, common concepts. So I think the way that you work against that is, yeah, like you could involve artists to create like human made work to help create like a more diverse data set, and basically like more diverse inspirations, if you will. And but I think another way is, as AI models get more sophisticated, you'll be able to write code. You'll be able to like engineer the model to kind of increase its own creativity. So I do think that it's like left unchecked is a danger, but there's definitely ways to work against that and to ensure that the model is getting more creative, more has more diverse outputs. And yeah, I think like both in terms of kind of the sociological solution of like involving people in the development of a model, and also just pure engineering, finding ways to counteract the bias that can result when you add in AI generated images into the data set, and then you could have this feedback loop where it kind of like the model gets more and more self-referential. So, but yeah, there's definitely ways around that, I think, as long as you're intentional about it.
awesome. Thank you so much for that response. So in general, if you want to summarize the benefits and challenges of using generative AI in the gaming space and fashion and spatial computing, how would you kind of point out different areas?
Yeah, there are many ways. Game development is just so complicated and challenging because you always like you're building an entire world from scratch. So like every element of a world and making it feel alive is it just takes a ton of work, and I think AI can be used for almost every aspect of it. So I think one thing that's like just um, becoming more and more usable is creating 3D assets using generative AI. So you have tools like Luma Labs is they've recently released their 3D generative AI tool, and CSM, Common Sense Machines, they have a pretty good 3D generation tool. And let's see, I don't know. There's a couple others I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but
Are these ready
yeah,
to use right now? Like the outcome is good enough to put it in the game?
yeah. So I think the current state is it's best used for either like more distant assets that you don't see really up close, or if you're just wanting to kind of like develop the look of a world, and understanding that the assets might not be the final assets, but you can
That's
get like
correct.
a good idea of how all the visuals fit together. So
Mhm.
there are definitely a lot of challenges with games where uh, you're always trying to figure out like what how different elements of the game interpret, or how different elements of the game influence your experience as a player. So you're
Mhm.
always trying to like develop a certain tone for different moments in the game, or a certain visual aesthetic, or like sometimes it's simple as just like colors, trying to like come up with how different colors should work in the game. And so yeah, I think being able to create 3D assets quickly can be really helpful for trying to develop like an aesthetic, or like how understanding how the 3D assets influence the narrative of the game, or kind of the overall feel of the world. I think it's really useful for that. And but yeah, otherwise, like the quality right now isn't high enough for like really high quality assets. Like if you wanted to have a player character that you're always looking at up close, I think player expectations are pretty high for that at this point, and
Mhm.
the AI just isn't good enough for for building that out. But if you have like distant, like a maybe like several clay pots that are at some house that's in the distance in your game level.
Mhm.
I think it works well enough for those kinds of solutions. Or otherwise, maybe a game where a lot of the visual elements are just small on the screen,
Right.
so you can't see really up close all the details. I think we're at that level, and of course, that'll be getting better and better all the time. I'm sure it won't be too long before before we're able to create a high quality close up avatar. But yeah, at least as of today, the technology is just starting, and so it's yeah, there's just limitations that we can't get past quite yet. So.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Like to share with us from the current work that you're doing. If you want to share your screen and talk more about it, we would love to.
Yeah. So, can you? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So one thing I've been working on, there's this game called the Serpent. Um, excuse me, the Serpent and the Seed, and I've been using AI to basically create different interpretations for the lighting. So Greg is the kind of the art director for the project. He's been generating a lot of concepts. So he illustrated this concept here of this scene. And my job is to light the scene in game. And so what I've been doing is using AI to quickly concept different ideas for how the lighting could work. So normally, what you would do is you would have some references and concepts, but none of them are like very exact to what the final in-game image would look like. So there's all this interpretation that you have to do of like, okay, here's a concept, it's just black and white. What does that actually mean if I were to translate it into color? So then I would go into the engine and I would then like apply what I think the lighting could look like in the actual game engine itself. And then I would try something out, maybe it wouldn't work, then I'd have to rework it, and then I'd have that all that back and forth, and it's a lot of iteration. And so what I'm doing here is I'm using generative AI to imagine very quickly. I can generate 50 different interpretations of what the lighting could look like in the game
Hmm.
in color, closer to a more finished illustration. It still might not be like the full fidelity, but here, like, even just with these two images, it's a completely different tone and feel to it.
Right.
um, and so I've been meeting with Greg, and we're talking through like, oh, okay, yeah, this is interesting how this changes the mood of this scene. Maybe we could
Right.
take this one element from this image. And so it just gives me a much clearer idea. Here are like four different generations that maybe this looks more like cell animation or something.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like here's one that's a little bit more muted and moody. This one's more of like a sunny day, but it's still pretty dark. Um, this is like kind of similar but different colors. So yeah, it's just like easy to brainstorm ideas for a completely different lighting setup. So yeah, here like the background is really lit, but the foreground's not.
Hmm.
So I can see like, instead of just trying to imagine that it's
Yes.
probably not going to work, I can see for sure, like, I don't think this is going to work, but I know why, because I can see the actual real, an example, a more finished example. Um, and so, yeah, it's really helpful because instead of doing all of that iteration of trying different ideas in the actual game engine, where every step takes so much longer, I can
Yes.
use image generation to really quickly try different ideas. And so all of these images, were generated in over the course of just like maybe an hour or maybe 2 hours at tops. Whereas like if I were to do this much iteration in the game engine, like actually creating the lighting and adjusting the colors and stuff, it would take days. So it just allows the overall quality of the game to be higher. So the budget for this work is already set. And so the question is like, how high of a quality can you create given that preset budget? And so now what I'm doing is I'm using AI to essentially do more development work of like understanding what different lighting styles, how that impacts the mood. I'm able to do more development work and develop more of an understanding, which then increases the quality of the game. Sometimes you might use AI to reduce the costs of the game, which is important because you need to keep your company alive. But other times you might, like, maybe you have a preset budget, and so you're just trying to use AI to make yourself more productive so that you can increase the quality of the game. And I think that maybe feeds into kind of the a concern that a lot of people have about AI, and it's like its potential danger for
Yes.
people's jobs. Like there's a lot of concern over people losing jobs. And from my experience as a game developer, I'm really not worried at all about that. And the reason why is because any industry is competitive, and because it's competitive, you always want to try and create a product or a service or whatever that's better than your competitors, right? And so because of that one thing, you're naturally going to try to increase the scope of something or increase the quality of something. And so I think in the games industry, what has happened, like there's been more and more technology. The technology is getting really advanced, and it's just getting more advanced every day. And so what's happened is, instead of there being less jobs in the game industry, now there's actually more jobs than there were, because games are getting bigger and bigger. And
Yeah.
so I think if you could give two game studios AI tools, I don't think like either of the studios is going to want to like fire 100 people on their team, on their 400-person team, right? They're not going to want to just like fire a bunch of people on their team. uh, I think what both of them would do is they're going to try and make the largest scope game that's like the most beautiful, the most exciting experience, or whatever their creative goals are. And they're going to use AI to try and maximize that goal as much as possible. And so if anybody like fires a bunch of people, it's not really going to be because of like they're just like AI gives them an excuse to do that. It's going to be because they are struggling financially and they need to find some way to reduce their costs. And so it's not like you could blame AI, but the problem isn't really that. It's just whatever, like you could say that about any tool that they're using. And so I think because you want to be competitive, there's going to be there's going to be plenty of jobs, and it's just that the nature of the work is going to change, just like it always has.
Yes.
So I think, yeah, I think the future is bright for the games industry. Uh, what you might actually, tools that you might be using, I think those are going to change. AI is going to become more a part of all of the tools that you use in game development. But yeah, I think that everybody's always going to want to make the largest virtual world they can, the most beautiful, the most like alive and full of beautiful details that inspire delight and really immerse you in the experience. And so because of that, I think there's always going to be plenty of work and plenty of jobs. And I think that probably you could argue that applies to almost any other industry. um,
Yes.
People want to make the highest quality product or service that they can. And so they'll just use AI to try and continue to increase the quality over time. So yeah.
Yeah, I love the example that you showed us because it helps with the kind of facilitating the collaboration and communication with the
Mhm.
team. Like it's all about kind of productivity, efficiency, and I
Yep.
think what you mentioned about different companies now, what do they do in the world of AI? I think some that are fearing this is because they're not adapting to the world. They're not adapting to go learn these skills, and so this is an opportunity. Again, you can choose to give up and or you could just adapt and learn. And I'm going to this game development conference. I noticed a lot of sessions are about teaching game developers how to take on new skills and do better in what they're doing, in addition to the AI that they have been using for many years. So yes, it's a great opportunity, and the future can be bright, especially with the new use cases that we are seeing now. A lot of folks that were not necessarily gamers traditionally are opening up to these new solutions because
Mhm.
of noticing that the storytelling and kind of Apple and other companies are stepping into this world and calling it spatial computing, but they're still using a lot of gaming tools, and so it's more opportunities, as you said, not less. So I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing that. We have a couple more minutes. Is there any kind of final thoughts that you want to share with us? Anything that our audience can support you with?
Yeah, I was gonna follow up on Chris's question about like tokenized fashion and stuff like that. I do think that there's a lot of new development happening with like experimenting with different ways to tokenize assets in Web3. And there are definitely blockchains that are specifically centered around AI agents being able to make their own transactions. So I do think that that is a future where you might have an AI assistant who really understands the style of clothing that you like, and then
Yeah.
it could potentially um, like build a wardrobe for you, and it would be a wardrobe of assets that you actually own, and it all of that would happen through an AI agent automatically making transactions on a blockchain. So I do think that that is something that could happen in the future for sure, because they're already people are already working on it in the Web3 and AI space. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for your time and insights. We always learn from you. You're a great talent in our community. And let us know how we can support you in the future. And for our audience, please make sure to follow Josh on LinkedIn and on other social media. What is your handle on X and other platform, Josh?
God at Play, GODATPLAY. So yeah, I'm
Awesome.
that on X. So
All right, thank you so much. And I'm gonna put in the comment section our newsletter. If you guys want to stay tuned on the world of AI, spatial computing, and fashion, make sure to register to our newsletter. And thank you again, Josh, for being with us. Thank you to our audience and amazing questions from Chris and Philip. Have a beautiful rest of your day, everyone. We'll see you next week. Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.